Hello, Neogenians. Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. This is going to be a pretty shocking one because we talk a lot about Gnosticism on my channel. And we know that most Gnostics did not have a very good view of the Demiurge. And if you don't know who that is, that's the God of the Bible. But they looked at the God of the Bible as being a very dark and malevolent force here to enslave humanity. Some Gnostics, like the Cathars, Gnostic adjacent group in the medieval period, literally saw him as Satan. Rex Mundi, they called him, king of the world. So the question is, if God is the Demiurge, if he's this malevolent being enslaving souls so much that some even considered him to be Satan himself, can he be saved? Can he wake up? Can he be redeemed? And what does that mean for us and our place here in the world? It's going to be a good one, my friends. So welcome. As always, I want to remind you that this is not a channel. We are a revolution of the mind, here to make higher consciousness go viral. So make sure you hit like, share, and subscribe to spread this like fire. Also, if you want to help out even more, you can become a member on YouTube or on Patreon and get access to free downloads on inner transformation, alchemy, Kabbalah, etc., things like that. You also get access to our members-only videos, and there are tons of them. And I think you'll really enjoy them. Some great topics there. So you get access to great stuff and you help out the channel. You can also support by checking out my books. I'm a Neogenian. I've written a 5-part series on the Neogenian system. And if you're looking for a free way to support, follow me on Spotify. I have a Spotify channel and we are reaching new people, new minds, new souls over there on that platform. And it's completely free to follow me over there. So please do that. Helps out a lot. Links to all those things there in the description of this video. All right, let's get started. So let's give a little recap here of who the Demiurge is, because it's going to be important to understand where we're coming from. And I know most of you probably are, so I won't make this too long, but we have to remember what the Demiurge actually is in the context of Gnosticism. So Demiurge just means craftsman. That's what Demiurge means. And so the Gnostics basically looked at the creator god, the craftsman, that's described in scripture, which later became compiled in the Bible. They looked at that God, the God of the Bible, and said, this is not the one true God. This is the Demiurge. This is a craftsman. And they described him as being completely ignorant of where he came from. And so the true God is the one in terms of Gnosticism, the one, the source, a realm of divine light, pure light. Some of that light ends up going out of alignment, and that gives birth to darkness, exemplified by the Demiurge. So the Demiurge is born from darkness, is a being of darkness. And you can also kind of get a hint at that when, in the Bible it says God said, let there be light. Well, the one, the ultimate source of reality, doesn't need to say, let there be light, because it is light. It is eternal light. So even there's a little, if the God of the Bible were truly a being of light, why does he need to say, let there be light? Because he's a being of darkness. And so in terms of Gnosticism, you have this Demiurge, but the Demiurge, they called him by many names as well. They called him by Yaldabaoth. They called him Samael, meaning the blind god, and Saklas, the fool. So not some, they basically the blind idiot god. If anyone knows about H.P. Lovecraft, that's an interesting synchronicity. But he's the blind idiot god, but the blind foolish god. Why? Because he doesn't know where he came from. He's cut off from the light. He lives in darkness. And so he thinks that he is born from darkness. Or not that he thinks he's born from darkness. He thinks that he's all that there is, that there's nothing else. So that's why he goes, I am God. There is no other God but me. I am the one true God. And then he gives birth to a bunch of demonic babies, basically called archons, which means rulers, and tells them all, hey, listen to me. I'm the only God. I'm the one true God. And they create material reality and create human bodies, and then start trapping souls of light into the human bodies, which kind of powers these bodies up like putting a battery into something. But the reason why the Demiurge is doing this is because he wants slaves. He wants to enslave mankind, to have these, humans worship him for forever. And this is the God of the Bible, of course. And the Gnostics said, hey, this is not a good God. This is an evil God. This is a villainous God. And so they, had a very negative view, so much so that the Cathars actually said he's actually Satan, that tricked humanity into thinking he was God. According to the Cathars, the Demiurge is Satan. They called him Rex Mundi, meaning king of the world, and essentially said that he tricked Moses into thinking that he was God, and then tricked Enoch into thinking he was God, and even got Enoch to write a bunch of books to basically trick humanity into thinking he was God. So in that context, Christians love to say the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he doesn't exist. Gnostics would say, at least the Cathars, is the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he is God. So not a good guy, not a great guy. But that raises the question, can he be redeemed? You would think not. And many Gnostic texts don't have that opinion. They view him as this purely ignorant and malicious being that must be defeated. And, whether it's in terms of the Demiurge or the terms of the devil, he is this ignorant, malicious force that must be defeated. So that view are held by, by Gnostics known as the Sethians and then the Cathars. Okay, so the Sethians were the ones that went, okay, the Demiurge is an asshole, he's enslaving humanity. That's what the Sethians said. And the Cathars went a step further by going, he's literally the devil. Okay, so with all that in mind, it would seem like this guy is irredeemable, that he's a lost cause. But then you have the Valentinian Gnostics come in, and they're really interesting. So the Valentinian Gnostics had a much more complex view of things. So essentially, what the Valentinian Gnostics believed is that when light went out of alignment, it didn't give birth to the Demiurge right away. It gave birth to a dark goddess called Achamat, which means the wisdom of death. And this dark goddess essentially existed in an intermediary area between the light and the material world, because she becomes the material world, essentially, because this dark goddess, Achamat, is born into confusion and despair, because this dark goddess believes she is the only thing that exists, that nothing else exists, it's just her. So she's in this existential crisis, this collapse, this state of loneliness, confusion, and turmoil, and she's going through all these different emotions, having essentially a cosmic mental breakdown. And from this cosmic mental breakdown comes matter. It says essentially that her tears become the rain and the oceans and all the bodies of water, that her confusion and ignorance crystallizes into matter. But not all the emotions are negative, because occasionally she has a brief memory, a brief flash of a realm of light that exists beyond her. Now, she's kind of in this psychotic, crazy state, so it's not a memory that holds forever, but occasionally she has flashes of remembrance. And from these flashes of remembrance, she smiles, and her smile becomes the sun. It becomes the light. It becomes the illuminating factor. And that's really important, okay? So from her desire to return to the light comes all the souls of the world. So according to this, and this is important to understand in connection to the Demiurge, but we're going to mainly focus on the Demiurge today, but you just have to know a little bit about Achamat. If you guys want a whole video on Achamat for me to stream on, let me know, tell me in the comments, and I'll do that. but you have to know a little bit about her to know about the Demiurge, okay? So you have all her confusion and ignorance and sadness that becomes the world, but her flashes of remembrance, when she smiles, becomes light in the world, illumination. And it says from her desire to return to the light comes all the souls of the world. So matter, confusion, sadness, chaos, ignorance. Souls desire to return to the light, but they all come from Achamat. They all come from the wisdom of death, this goddess that's spiraling into madness. So what's important to understand here, though, okay, let me not get ahead of myself here. So long story short, I'll go more into this if you guys want a whole video on Achamat, but long story short, she becomes pregnant. And what she gives birth to, various things, but one of the main beings that she gives, she gives birth to different structures or levels of reality, but we don't need to get into that now. But what she also gives birth to is the Demiurge. So the Demiurge is the dark child of Achamat in Valentinian Gnosticism. And for those who might be familiar with Gnosticism, Achamat is Sophia's shadow. If you don't know, it doesn't matter. So the Demiurge is the dark child of Achamat. But guess what? Like his mother, well, first of all, he also has that longing to return like his mother because he came from his mother, but he doesn't know what's there, basically. He's completely ignorant and unaware. And so remember, Achamat thought she was the only being in existence. Well, same thing with the Demiurge. The Demiurge believes that he's the only, he forgets everything about his mother. And so he thinks he's the only being in existence, which is why he goes, I am the one true God. There is no other God but me. And he begins to organize the material world. So Achamat kind of provides like the structure and raw material, and the Demiurge organizes it. And he's not aware of Achamat. But in some texts that describe the Valentinian myth by the early church fathers, it says that Achamat was actually kind of like pulling the strings from behind the scenes. So the Demiurge is kind of like her puppet. He doesn't know about her, but she is kind of using him as a tool and working behind the scenes. But Achamat isn't all bad, right? Just making a note to myself here. So Achamat isn't all bad. She's just kind of half crazy. She's having this mental breakdown. She's half crazy. She's having this mental breakdown. And what she ends up doing is that she wants to return to the light. Okay, that's her goal. She wants to return to the light. And she's trying to figure out like how to do this in this mad state, this insane state. And so she gives birth to all these levels of reality. She gives birth to the Demiurge. But what she also does, though, is that within Achamat has light in her. Achamat isn't all darkness. She has light from the one. Even if she isn't like totally aware of it or fully understand it, she has light. That's how she's able to create and do all these things ultimately. And why her smile becomes the sun and illuminates reality. So she passes that light into the Demiurge. Now, when I say passes the light into the Demiurge, I don't mean like, oh, I got this scented candle for Christmas and I'm going to give it to you because I don't want it. Not like that, but more like lighting another flame, right? If you give someone a candle, you don't have it anymore. But if they have a candle and you have a candle and your candle is lit, you can pass the flame and light their candle and still have the flame. So that's what it means. It's not like Achamat gives it away and doesn't have it anymore, but passes it like lighting a candle, passing a flame. So that light gets embedded within the Demiurge. But again, it says the Demiurge basically has no idea about this, doesn't know that it's actually in him. It exists within him unconsciously. He's not aware of it. All right. So that's what happens with the Demiurge. And then what the Demiurge ends up doing is creating human bodies. And when he blows life into them, unbeknownst to him, he's blowing that light into them as well. So humans have that light. So the light originated from the one, went to Achamat, went to the Demiurge, and then went to us. So we all have the light of the one within us, whether we know it or not. And so just to be clear, what that light represents is spirit. So the Gnostics basically divided reality into three types: spiritual, or the spirit, the soul, and the body. Okay, so all of us are spirit, soul, and body. Our body comes from the confusion and turmoil of Achamat. Our soul comes from her desire to return to the light, but our spirit is the eternal aspect of ourselves. It is the light itself. Okay, it is the light. And so so what's the difference between soul and spirit? Soul basically represented the human intellect, the mind, emotions, feelings, the part of us that can be trapped in illusion and become confused, but also the part that can desire and long for things. And the spirit is our eternal aspect, our true aspect. And so the soul desires to return to or unite with the spirit when it's properly oriented. You can become distracted and desire crazy bullshit, but if it's properly oriented, it's this desire for spirit. Psychologically, spirit is like the higher self, and the soul is like the ego. That's kind of the idea here in simplistic terms. And so what you want to do is have the ego become aligned with the higher self, or have soul aligned with the spirit. Okay, so what does all this have to do with the redemption of the Demiurge? Can the Demiurge be saved? Well, in this tradition, this is the Valentinian story of things. In this tradition, the Demiurge isn't wholly malicious, or he's not intentionally malicious. He's just dumb. He's ignorant of the worlds above him. He thinks he's the only being in existence. So basically, he's kind of half crazy too. He's working from very, very limited awareness, very limited knowledge. And because of that, he thinks that what he is doing is good, but in actuality, he starts acting like a cosmic dictator, a tyrant, a fascist. But he's not doing this, according to the Valentinians, intentionally to try and harm humanity. It's like this twisted form of justice. Sometimes they even call him the just God. Not that he's truly just, but that he's working from this version of justice. And so what does that mean? Well, think of like the justice of a Nazi regime or something, a fascist regime. Justice, in that what they would call justice, isn't actually justice. But in the context of that regime, it's called justice. So the Demiurge believes that he's delivering justice, organizing the world, but he's basically a fascist. He's too dumb to figure that out, too ignorant to realize that. But the idea here, though, is that he's not really intentionally being an asshole. He just is, because he's ignorant. So since that is the case, the problem isn't in being intentionally evil. The problem is that he's very confused. And if he is very confused, that leads to the potential for what? Waking up. If the problem is confusion, you can clear that confusion through knowledge and understanding, through gnosis. So let's take a closer look at the redemption of the Demiurge. By the way, also, if you guys want to know about if the Archons can be redeemed, also let me know. So those are two videos we could do. We could do a video on Achamat, or we could do a video on the Archons redemption. If you want to do both, that's cool too. Just let me know in the comments. Tell me what you guys want. Let me make a note to myself as that being a possible topic. Okay, so here's what let's see what happens here. So we are going to read what the Valentinians believed from a guy named Tertullian. Actually, let's not go there first. Let's talk about a Valentinian Gnostic text called the Tripartite Tractate. And the Tripartite Tractate is a really interesting Valentinian text. It's the tripartite, meaning it's the tractate, the text is in three parts. The three divisions of the text, basically. A text divided into three. That's essentially what the Tripartite Tractate means. And you'll find threes all over here. In this text, that's where it heavily discusses the three, the spiritual, the spirit, the soul, and the body. It's just, anyway, that doesn't matter. Why am I even saying? Who cares? It's just, that's what its name is about. So anyway, it's a Valentinian text. It's the Tripartite Tractate. And it describes the Demiurge in a very interesting way. It essentially says that the divine logos, the divine light essentially, actually put the Demiurge in charge to be the organizer of the material world on purpose. It's just the Demiurge was so ignorant that he started acting like an asshole. But he was actually assigned that role by the light. He just started going crazy. So let's take a look at this. The Tripartite Tractate says, over all of the archons, the logos. And what is the logos? The logos means word, but it also means reason or divine intelligence. It's a structuring intelligence. And it's associated with the realms of light. So it's a structuring intelligence, reason, from the light. And this logos, over all the archons, assigned an archon whom no one commands. That's the Demiurge. He is the Lord of them all. Namely, the face the logos produced by his thought to be a representation of the Father of the totalities. So that's super interesting and way different than how we normally conceive of the Demiurge. The Demiurge was appointed by the divine intelligence of the light to be a lower representation of the one, essentially. Like a miniature version of it, a lower version of it, a pixelated version of it, a lower copy, lower resolution version. A representation, an icon. So he reflects the source. He reflects the one in this context, but he doesn't know it, and he gets out of control. And he starts acting like a dictator because he doesn't rather than being like, oh, I reflect the source, he starts saying, I am the source. And that's the problem. That's when it gets out of hand. And psychologically speaking, we can understand this as like the higher self and the ego. The higher self is like the one. The higher self is the totality of your psyche. It is everything. And the ego is the center of your field of consciousness. Now, when the ego isn't aware of the higher self, things go out of hand. This is where ego identification comes in, or ego inflation. And that's a big problem when you think the ego is your whole self, because it's not. It's just a limited, small portion of you. You are the higher self. And a lot of problems arise when you identify as the ego. So the ego, when it's ignorant of the higher self, says, I am the true self. I am the only self. There is no self but me. but that's wrong. There's a higher self. But likewise, the Demiurge goes, I am the true God. I am the one God. I am the only God. There is no God but me. So the Demiurge is very similar to ego inflation, an unhealthy ego in his unredeemed state. And the ego, though, when you have a healthy ego, though, it recognizes the higher self, and it's described as it becoming the servant of the higher self. And Carl Jung even writes, the relation of the ego to the higher self is like that of the son to the father. And what did the tripartite tractate just say? That the Demiurge was a representation of the father of the totalities. So, making a note to myself, just always have these ideas that pop up. I want to make sure I don't forget them. Okay, let's get back to this. So we have the Demiurge, because he's misaligned. He, instead of being a knowing that he's a representation of the source, he thinks he is the source, and that's how he starts becoming a cosmic asshole. But when the Logos is originally appointing the Demiurge as to be the representation of the Logos or of the One, it says this: he, therefore, meaning the Demiurge, is beautified with every name that is a likeness of him, because he possesses every quality and glorious attribute. So the text is basically saying, because he's a representation of the One, he's like the lower version of it. And the text even says he can be called Father, God, King, and Judge, because those divine qualities are present. The problem is, it gets out of hand. It says the Logos employs him as a hand to put in order the work of the things below. So the Logos is the divine intelligence, the rational structuring force of reality, and is like, hey, you know what? I'm going to assign the Demiurge as being the structuring force of the lower world. Does that make sense? The divine Logos is like the structure of the higher world, but it's like, okay, well, but we have this lower world that needs structuring too, so let's assign the Demiurge to do that. But here's the key detail. The tripartite says this: when he spoke, the Demiurge spoke, and put in order, started ordering things, when he saw that his works were great and good and wondrous, he was delighted and glad, being ignorant that the movement within him originated from the spirit that moves him. So he starts to get a God complex. He starts creating things and like, wow, look how awesome I am. I'm out here creating stars and planets and trauma. And I must be the only God, and I'm so great. Everyone needs to listen to me. I am king. I am God. I am judge. Not as a representation, but as claiming to be that. And so it gets out of control. He starts acting like a fascist. So this is where we get the problem. And this is why in terms of Gnosticism, we have the Demiurge doing all these horrible things, accepting sacrifices, and trying to, have humanity be his slaves and all that. Not necessarily because he's doing it intentionally, like in the Sethian Gnosticism, but because he thinks he's delivering justice and order. So it's a twisted and awful form of justice and order, but that's what he thinks. And this is a lot more, I like this version of the Demiurge. I think it's much more realistic. Because in Sethian Gnosticism, he's more like a cartoon villain, very one-dimensional, just a bad guy. In Valentinian Gnosticism, it's more like what we experience in the real world, because often villains don't think they're the villain. From their perspective, they think that they're doing the right thing or the good thing. Now, not always. There's some real psycho crazy people out there. But in general, usually those who are acting villainous don't consider themselves the villain. It's kind of like Anakin becoming Darth Vader. Like Anakin becomes Darth Vader because he thinks, I'm going to set the galaxy in order. I'm going to order the galaxy according to the Empire. But then ultimately Darth Vader is redeemed when he finally realizes, wow, we've been causing chaos and destruction and harm because we serve the dark. So we have a kind of a similar idea like this going on. So in Sethian Gnosticism, the Demiurge is a very tends to be a one-dimensional character. Where in Valentinian Gnosticism, he's more like Darth Vader, who has these arcs of falling into darkness. But then, let's talk about this potentiality of being redeemed. All right? And what it means for us. Looking at the time, making sure that I don't just go on tangents so we have actual time to talk about this. All right. So now we're going to read a quote that comes from Tertullian, who wrote. So Tertullian hated the Gnostics, okay? So he hated the Gnostics, but he hated them so much that he wrote books about them. And so ironically, he hated them so much that he ended up preserving their work because he wrote about them so much. Which is really kind of funny and ironic that we know a good chunk of what we know about different forms of Gnosticism because this guy and others hated them so much that they couldn't stop, like hate watching their stories basically on Instagram. They're just hate watching and recording everything. And, oh, this is what they're doing and they're so bad and look at what they're doing now. So anyway, this is him describing what the Valentinians believe. So Tertullian writes that, meanwhile, the Demiurge, being still ignorant of everything, no sooner heard of the arrival of the Savior that he runs to him with haste and joy with all his might. So in Sethianism, the Demiurge hated Christ. Same thing with the Cathars, hated Christ. But in Valentinian Gnosticism, when he beholds the true light of Christ, he is ecstatic. He's filled with joy and happiness. Because think about it, how lonely it would be to think that you're the only thing, and then to realize, wait, there's, it's, that old saying, it's lonely at the top. It's kind of like that idea, where the Demiurge is just thinking he's the one at the top, when he realizes, like, oh my God, a real God, basically. And he runs to Jesus. He's like fangirling over him. Wants his autograph. But here's the interesting part. Is that what does Christ represent? Christ represents the principle of awakening. So in the story, right, in the story form, it's like, oh, well, the Demiurge sees Christ and becomes filled with joy. But it says, so it also says that the Demiurge was enlightened by him, Christ, on all points. Okay? So the Christ wakes the Demiurge up and teaches him, essentially. So in the story form, it's like, oh, the Demiurge is this cosmic dictator who encounters Christ and has a moment of awakening. And it's like, oh my God, you're awesome. Tell me everything. And Christ does, and he learns and becomes enlightened from Christ. But if we look at this in a deeper sense, remember that Christ just represents the principle of awakening. and Christ is within us. So this is more like the Demiurge looking within and finding inner knowledge and having enlightenment and waking up, finding that awakening, finding the light within himself, essentially. We can interpret that as. And psychologically, we can interpret that as the ego realizing that there is a higher self. Let me make a note to myself. So it's the ego realizing, the ego looks within, finds its light, wakes up, and realizes that there's a higher self and is like, oh my God, this is awesome. But there's also a cosmic perspective to this, and one we're going to discuss. So it says that being enlightened by him on all points, the Demiurge being enlightened by Christ on everything, he learns from him also of his own prospect. He learns what's going to happen to him, what he should be doing, and how that he is to succeed his mother's place. Okay, that's important. Remember, Achamat is this in this like liminal zone between the light and the material world. Well, the Demiurge essentially realizes that he's going to go to that place. So he becomes the intermediary from the divine to the material. And again, this makes sense psychologically. This is the ego coming into alignment with the higher self and connecting the higher self to the world of consciousness and ultimately the world of action. Because we are now taking action from the tool of our ego, but in accordance with alignment of our higher self. So we are, in a sense, acting out the will of the higher self rather than the will of the ego. The ego is the tool that transmits that. The ego aligns with the higher self and then drives our actions according to our higher self. So like the Demiurge taking in this liminal space, connecting the light to the material, the ego aligns with the higher self, taking this, meaning that it's allowing the higher self to sort of access the world of consciousness. The ego becomes the representation of the higher self, like the Demiurge is the representation of the one, and also drives action. So that's how we have that connection here between the lower world and the higher world, and the Demiurge sitting between them now, because now the Demiurge is aligned. That's why he sits in that intermediary stage now, because he's aligned now. Before he was in a lower stage, disconnected from the light and just in the material. But now he's in this intermediary stage that connects the two. Now, what happens now? Being thenceforth, oh, hold on, actually, I'm making so many notes to myself. Actually, forget it. I'll make so many notes, I'm just going to drive myself crazy. Okay, so it says this. What happens next? Being thenceforth free from all care, he's no longer ignorant, confused, and having turmoil. He's free from anxiety. He's free from care. Being free from all care, he carries on the administration of this world, mainly under the plea of protecting the church for as long a time as may be necessary and proper. There's a lot to unpack here. This is really cool. So here's what's going on. When the Demiurge becomes enlightened, the material world doesn't immediately vanish and all souls automatically become enlightened because they're free from the Demiurge. No, the Demiurge fulfills his role as being the administrator of the physical world. He's just doing it from knowledge and enlightenment now. So he still has his same function, but he's doing it from awareness now. He's ordering and structuring the material world for what? Under the plea of protecting the church for as long a time as may be necessary and proper. What does that mean for protecting the church? The church is not a physical building. The church, or the ecclesia, means the collective of awakened souls. That's what it means. The ecclesia is the collective of awakened souls. So the Demiurge, being enlightened, structures the world to protect the collective of awakened souls and the ones who are starting to wake up. So he still administers the world, but the way he does it changes. He was ruled from ignorance before, but now he does it with understanding. He realizes that he has a higher purpose. So we've talked about so what does this mean exactly? So we've talked about what it means psychologically is being aligned with the higher self, the ego becoming aligned with the higher self. But let's look at this as in a cosmic perspective for a minute. So in a cosmic perspective, when we think about the world, the Sethian Gnostics saw the world basically as like a prison to escape. The Valentinians didn't have that view. The Valentinians' view was more like it's a training ground where everyone is super confused and doesn't really know what's going on, but that it can feel like a prison. So the Demiurge in his ignorant state, who structures the world like a prison, represents the state of our current world because we are ruled by ignorance. The ignorant oligarchs, the billionaires, the corrupt politicians. We are ruled by corruption and a toxic form of justice. On a cosmic scale, or at least a world in terms of the earth, that is what the ignorant Demiurge represents. And that's why the world feels like a prison. But it's not actually a prison. It just feels like that because it's ruled by ignorance, demiurgic ignorance, oligarchy, billionaire, etc. More notes to myself. All right. So, though, when the Demiurge is redeemed, what does that mean in a cosmic scale? Well, the Demiurge redeemed means structuring the world so our world gets structured from a place of knowledge and understanding so that it becomes not like a prison, but like a cocoon that allows the souls of the world to develop and come to knowledge. You see the difference? Right now, the world is set up to try and keep us from knowledge. But a redeemed world is structured according to helping us acquire knowledge. The prison becomes the cocoon. So here's an interesting thing, is that to understand this better, let's talk a little bit about Saturn. So why do we want to talk about Saturn? Okay. We know the Demiurge rules the lower cosmic system, the realm of matter and the planetary powers, etc. And according to Gnosticism, the Demiurge rules the earth and the 7 layers of the heavens of chaos, of what they call them. That's more of a Sethian term, though. I don't think they really use heavens of chaos in Valentinianism as far as I'm aware. Maybe they do. I'm not aware of it, though. But there are these, so there's the earth and these 7 heavens. And each of these 7 heavens are assigned or associated with one of the classical planets. In ancient systems, they saw reality as being the earth and then 7 planets. And they thought that the moon and the sun, they considered the moon and the sun to be planets as well. And the planet furthest away was Saturn. So Saturn, being in the 7th layer, is the closest one to the Demiurge, essentially. So Saturn becomes associated with the Demiurge, not because the Demiurge necessarily is only Saturn, but because Saturn represents the boundary of the Demiurge's domain. And why is this important for what we're understanding here? Well, first of all, I want to make this clear. The early Christian scholar Origen of Alexandria described Saturn as being in sympathy with the lion-like ruler Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth is described often as having the face of a lion and the body of a dragon. So Saturn is in sympathy with, or working with, or resonates with, closest to the Demiurge. Now, the reason why this is important is because Saturn, when we're talking about Saturn, we're not talking about the planet literally. Just like when we talk about the 4 elements, we're not talking about the elements literally. When we talk about fire, we don't literally mean fire, we mean willpower. When we talk about air, we don't literally mean air, we mean intellect. When we talk about water, we don't really mean water, we mean emotions, etc. So when we talk about Saturn, well, we're not talking about the planet, we're talking about what it represents. And Saturn is often seen as representing a cosmic prison. It represents the rigid force that structures the material world, where the soul becomes trapped. In later esoteric traditions, it became represented by a black cube, often called the black cube of Saturn, which is, a cube is a very structured, solid, heavy shape that symbolizes containment. The black cube is almost looked at as like a prison, a Saturnian prison. But here's the thing. That's not the only way to see it, because Saturn doesn't necessarily always represent a prison. Fundamentally, what Saturn represents is simply boundaries, structure, and limitation. And that's what the Demiurge does, right? Boundary, structure, and limitation. And boundary, structure, and limitation is not necessarily a bad thing. The walls of a prison confine you, but the walls of a house protect you. So without limits and boundaries, nothing holds together. Without structure, nothing can take form. And, if you have no boundaries, people are going to walk all over you like a doormat. So boundary, structure, and limitation is not inherently a bad thing. It can go either, just like anything, it can go either way. So the Demiurge the Demiurge in one of his forms represents, this structuring force of boundary, limitation, and etc. And that's what Saturn represents, as kind of that force of the Demiurge, this force of containment and limitation and boundaries. But like we saw, it's not always, people very often see Saturn as this like wholly negative symbol. But it's not. It's just boundaries and limitations. It can be the walls of a prison or the walls of a house. So when you look at it from that way, the same cube that looks like a trap from one perspective can also be seen as what makes growth possible. So, but it has to be transformed. Right now, we're in a state that feels like a prison. But what we need to do is transform that prison into a cocoon, or like an incubator. And what does a cocoon and an incubator exist for? It exists just long enough for what's within it to mature and then pass beyond it. And that's essentially what's happening here. We exist in a world that feels like a prison, but we need to change it so that it becomes a cocoon or an incubator. So this lines up with what Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, that the kingdom isn't somewhere else, that it's right in front of you. But when people don't see it, that's why it feels like a prison, because it's ruled from ignorance. That's why it's crucial to understand that the world is not an evil prison designed to torture you. It just feels like that because it's ruled by ignorant demiurgic powers. But it's up to us to transform it, which is why it's critical to realize that it is not about escaping the material world like you escape a prison. That's not what it's about. It's about transforming it so it becomes a cocoon. Because humanity is at this level of reality where it needs to reach a higher state of consciousness. And so basically what I'm trying to say is this structure that you feel locked into, you can't just escape from it. In order to pass beyond it, you have to transform it into a cocoon. Then you will mature, then humanity as a collective will mature, develop, and transcend the material world. Not because it escaped it like a prison, but because it transformed it into the kingdom. An incubator, a cocoon that developed this world soul of ours so that we can collectively transcend it. That's what it's all about. And that's what the redemption of the Demiurge represents. On a psychological level, it's about the ego becoming in alignment with the higher self. On a cosmic level, it's about transforming the world so that it is no longer ruled by demiurgic ignorance, but rather ruled from knowledge of the light, of what we truly are, of our true essence. So it becomes an incubator. That's why it says the Demiurge administers the world so it can protect the church. It's like how a cocoon protects what is inside so it can mature and grow. So that's the function of the Demiurge redeemed, which is very important. Now, you might be wondering about Achamat, because that's a whole nother layer to the story, and that's kind of where it picks up. Because Achamat, whereas like the Demiurge represents this cocoon forming, Achamat starts to represent what's growing inside the cocoon. And so if you want a video about that, about the redemption of Achamat, or even about the redemption of the Archons, let me know, tell me in the comments, and we'll do a live stream about it. Tell me which one you want, or if you want both, etc. Let me know. But I hope this was enlightening for you. It's kind of a big twist. I remember, being kind of shocked about this. Oh, I forgot to turn on one of my lights. Anyway, I remember being kind of shocked about this when I first read it, but it made sense to me. Like, I liked it because it's just, other Gnostic texts are so anti-Demiurge. Literally, the Cathars calling him Satan. It was kind of surprising to find a Gnostic text. It was like, well, he's not doing this intentionally. He's an asshole because he doesn't know what's going on, but he can understand. This is our ego that acts like an asshole, but can become aware of the higher self and become aligned with it. And that's the lesson to take from this. The lesson to take from the redemption of the Demiurge is ego in alignment with the higher self and transformation of the world as a whole. That's why Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas says the kingdom is within you and all around you. So as always, my friends, if you made it to this part in the video, I want you to tell me in the comments, because I'm always curious about who watches these videos to the end and who just watches the first 10, 15 minutes and then clicks off. So if you watched it all the way here, hey, congratulations. You are actually interested in knowledge, which is pretty rare these days. People just want these quick fix TikTok videos that only barely scratch the surface, if even that. So let me know, tell me in the comments, and be proud of yourself for seeking what is difficult. because these are not easy concepts. And of course, I want to remind you that we are way more than a channel. We are a revolution of consciousness here to wake the world the fuck up. So make sure you hit like, share, and subscribe so we can spread that higher consciousness, because that's exactly what we're doing here. We are sort of like everything I just described in terms of transforming the self and transforming the world, the kingdom within and the kingdom all around us. That is exactly what we're doing. That is the mission of this channel. That's the mission of my books. That's the mission of every Neogenian creator. That's what we are here to do. We are here to catalyze the new world into existence. So when you hit like, share, and subscribe, helps spreads that fire, helps spreads that transformation. If you want to help out even more, you can become a member on YouTube or on Patreon. Helps me create bigger and better videos. And you can get access to a lot of great stuff like free downloads on inner transformation, alchemy, Kabbalah, as well as our members only videos. There's a ton of them. They're really great. The last members only video was all about how Christianity didn't actually come from Jesus. It came from Paul, which is really interesting. Paul was a Roman citizen that used to drag Christians into prison and signed off on the execution of one of the earliest Christians. And then suddenly was like, you know what, guys, never mind. I'm a Christian now. Here's this other weird version of Christianity that you guys should believe in. Very sus. Anyway, I'm getting off topic, but that was the last members only video. It was a really interesting one. And as always, my friends, hey, if you want a free way to support, you can. Oh yeah, and you can also check out my books. I got books on the if you're wondering like what the hell is the Neogenian system, I have a whole 5-part book series. You can also follow me on Spotify. That's totally free to do. We're reaching a ton of new people on Spotify. We're spreading that flame over there. So if you have a Spotify account, please go follow me. Just takes a second, just a little click, and it helps out a lot and completely free to do. The links to all those things, books, Spotify memberships, they're in the description of this channel. I want to give this video, I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports. You guys are awesome, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, Dallas, Nusalina, Eric, Sol, Toronado, Banshee, Pop Out, Hyper Saiyan, Chris, Arkraziel, Joe, HKA, Masticate, and everyone else. Thank you very much. My name is Morgue, and I am Neogenian. Ad Astra.